Okay, super. Then good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the fantastic SPDEs and Friends conference. So I'm very happy to introduce the next, the first speaker of this morning session, who is Rémi Rotz of the University of Marseille. And he's going to speak about Siegel's axioms and conformal bootstrap in Liouville theory. So we're very much looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. So my talk will be more about friends than SPDEs. And it's related in spirit to the talk we had yesterday by Jeremy. It's about identifying the integral structure of systems that are called actually conformal field theories. And I want to present my talk in parallel to some word that you know that you all know by heart, the world of 1D Markov processes. So let me start with a simple picture that you know by heart. So it's if you consider say a Markov process indexed by time. Just before I start, let me. It's an introductory talk, so I'll be very sketchy today. So I just want you to get the idea. So let's start with the Markov process indexed by time, and you want to describe its law. So what you get in general. So you have a propagator, which is the semi-group associated to your Markov process. And let's assume that it has a kernel with respect to its invariant measure. And now what you can do is to take a line segment and you put, so this line segment has two ends, left and right. And let me just call them in and out because of the terminology I want to use today. So let's call left side in end and the right side out end. So on each line segment, you can put on it the kernel of your propagator, and I will call it an amplitude today. And you all know that if I have two line segments with two amplitudes on each of them, then you can glue these two line segments by their ends. You take an out end and you glue it to an in end. And the amplitude you get on the glued segment, okay, is follow this rule for Markov processes. Okay, that you take the partial trace of the glued variable. So here the y variable stands for the component you want to glue, and it's called this procedure here is called a partial trace. Okay, this way you can glue segment together with the amplitudes, and you get a semi-group. Okay, a description at least of the semi-group, and you know that this semi-group can describe the law of your Markov process. So this is the picture more or less that I want to generalize today. In the case when the stochastic processes you're looking at are indexed by Riemann surfaces instead of subset of the real line. And this question is relevant for quantum field theories, which are mostly indexed by Riemann surfaces. Okay, so this is more or less the content of Siegel's axiom for conformal field theories. And actually, I will focus today on conformal field theory, but Siegel's axioms are valid for QFTs in general. I mean, at least we believe it's valid for QFTs. So what is the context of conformal field theories? So it's a very rough description of the context. So you know that quantum field theories are used to model a statistical physics system. And what you are interested in are expectation values of some relevant observables that are called fields in this context. And so you want to compute these correlation functions. It turns out that usually at critical temperature, if your system exhibits a second order phase transition, your system will will exhibit some further symmetries that are said to be conformal. And therefore, your QFT is called a conformal field theory. Well, there is a breakthrough in the 80s by Belavin, Polyakov, and Zavolodchikov, because they realized that this extra symmetries gives very strong constraints on the system, and they used this constraint to classify CFTs. And actually, they give explicit expression for a whole family of 2D conformal field theories, which are minimal models, which are called minimal models, whatever it is. But among them, you have, for instance, the critical Ising model. And since then, it is believed that all conformal field theories have more or less the same structure, and it's called the conformal bootstrap. And you have even more recently, spectacular results with the use of the conformal bootstrap to make prediction concerning the critical 3D Ising model. So basically, what I want to tell you today is a few words about this conformal bootstrap. Well, again, this I want to help your intuition. So this is nothing is really rigorous here. I want to describe what you can expect with this conformal field theory. So it's not always the case, but sometimes you may have a functional integral approach to describe your CFT. Well, what is a functional integral? So it's some kind of measure on some functional space. So you had an example yesterday in the talk of AJ about Yang-Mills. Well, it was a formal path integral, but you have this type of measure. So the set you integrate over is the set of all possible configuration of your system. You have a uniform measure here on lambda. And here you have a weight, which is the exponential of minus inverse temperature times the Hamiltonian, whatever it is. And this way, if you can make sense of this measure, which is not always obvious, because often the set of lambda, the set of possible configuration is infinite dimensional. But if you can make sense of this measure, you get a path integral. And for CFTs and most QFTs, this integration variable sigma is a space of maps which are defined on the Riemann surface equipped with a Riemannian metric G. In my talk, G will always stand for a Riemannian metric, a metric on your manifold. Okay, so most of the time, actually, I will be interested when your fields, your sigma, is indexed by a Riemann surface, is indexed by a variable evolving on a Riemann surface. Well, and so here you have a parameter beta, and perhaps you have also other parameters, but for some systems, you have a phase transition of second order, and you compute the expectation values of some relevant observable. And if you observe a failure of analyticity of your observable, then you get a second order phase transition. You get a CFT at this critical value of the parameters. It's a bit sketchy here, but I don't want to go too much into details. So you have a way to detect a phase transition. And in this case, you are interested in looking at this functional integral at its critical temperature. And then you want to compute the correlation function, which are this specific relevant observable here that you integrate over this functional integral. So for instance, the observables that you are interested in the case of the critical Ising model, this F here are could be the value of the spin at some given point on the surface, or you can also take the energy density of your Ising field. So this is just a rough picture of what you can expect for CFTs. Well, anyway, there is a geometrical approach of CFTs. And so, mostly based on what I said, the data are expectation values. So you have a Riemann surface sigma. In my talk, they will be two-dimensional. So you have a metric, G, on your surface, and you are able to define an expectation value that I denote with bracket, indexed by this metric and Riemann surfaces. And you have also a collection of random fields, say, which are defined on your manifold. And I will denote them with V alpha. They are called primary fields, and to each of them, so to each alpha, you attach a number which is called the conformal weight, and that I will denote this way. So they have to satisfy some properties. Anyway, what you want to compute is this expectation values of these special fields of your special observables of your system. So what do they satisfy? So they should be invariant under diffeomorphism. So basically, this means that when you change by pullback your metric, then it just amounts to changing the position of points. So this means that, well, basically your theory is invariant under reparametrization. And this is what you expect from any reasonable physics system. Something more specific is the Weil invariance. So this about the change in your correlation function when you change your metric by a conformal factor. A conformal factor, this is a positive function, so you can also you can write it as exponential of some function. So if you multiply your metric by some positive function, then actually the dependence in this factor in your correlation function is totally explicit, and this changes your expectation values by a global functional, which is called the Liouville functional. Here you have the gradient of your function phi on the manifold, and this term here is the Ricci curvature on the manifold, and the Vg is the volume form attached to the metric G. So whatever, I don't need this functional in my talk, but you the way the correlation function moves when you change the metric with a Weil factor, it's completely explicit. So and the number C that you got here is called the central charge for CFTs, and it helps classifying them. So here the message is that you have expectation values indexed by metrics, that the dependence of your correlation function when you change the metric by diffeo is completely explicit, and when you change the metric by a conformal factor, it is also completely explicit. So basically, if you look at the space of all possible metrics on your manifold, quotiented out by the action of diffeomorphism or Weil factor, this is the only degree of freedom that you've got. Okay, so and this set of Riemannian metrics quotiented out by diff and Weil is called the moduli space. So basically, what you need to know is the value of this correlation function on the moduli space of your manifold. Okay. So this is very different from Sigal's approach, and now I'm going to tell you quite another story about CFTs. These are Sigal's actions. Basically, it's in the same spirit as what I explained for Markov processes. So you want to cut Riemann surfaces into pieces. So, and you want to attach operators on these pieces. So the pieces I will consider, instead of line segment, I will consider Riemann surfaces with holes. So holes are these circles at the ends of my my surface, and on this surface with holes, I have marked points. Marked points will serve later to identify the location of the random fields I want to evaluate. And so this surface has an orientation, and for each circle at the end of your manifold, you prescribe arbitrarily an orientation. Okay, and if the orientation on the manifold coincide with the orientation that you get on your circle, then you call it out. And if it's different, you call it in. So for segment, it was in and out for left and right. Here, this is just a choice that you make depending on the orientation of the surface and the circle. So why do you do so? It's to glue together these pieces. So if you have two such manifolds, you can glue together in boundary with a out boundary, so that the glued manifold has a well-defined orientation. So I will denote this way these glued surfaces, and well, this will be the elementary pieces of manifolds that I want to consider. And now Segal tells you that you want to attach operators on these pieces. And these operators are defined on the Hilbert space. So this is Segal's view on conformal field theories. So you are given a Hilbert space, a bit like the Hilbert space for the invariant measure of the Markov process in 1D. So now you are in 2D. You are given, this is the data of your CFT, you are given a Hilbert space. And now for each admissible surface, so admissible surface will be for me just a decorated surface, like here. And to each point, I want to attach a weight. And the weight are these real numbers, alpha I. And basically, these are the index. They will serve to tell you which field you consider on your manifold. Okay, this weight, recall that this weights serve to identify the field you want to consider at some location. So if I come back here, so you have a decorated surface, you attach weight to each Zi, and you have your decorated boundaries. And for each such admissible surface, you should be able to attach, if you want to define a CFT, to attach an operator on this decorated surface. So its entries are on the tensor product of H, tensor product number of times of out boundaries, and with taking values in the tensor product of H with a number the number of in boundaries. Okay, so basically this means that you will have variables at each boundary circles. These variables are evolved in your Hilbert space, and for all the in well, say for all the out boundaries, you will consider the tensor product of your Hilbert spaces, and your operator will send the out boundaries into in boundaries. Okay, and so of course these operators are to be compatible in some way. So basically they have to satisfy diffeomorphism and veil invariance. So I won't describe what it is, but it's in the same spirit as I told you last slide. If your surface has no boundary, so in the case that, yes, it may happen that your surface has no boundary, and in this case, your operator is just a real number, because these two sets are empty. Yes, they are empty. So this operator is just a real number, and it corresponds to the correlation function of your fields evaluated at the ZI. And furthermore, they have to be compatible when you glue them when you glue decorated surfaces together. So I just wrote this compatibility as a trace. Actually, it's a partial trace. I won't give you a precise definition, but it works exactly the same way as you do for Markov processes in 1G. In 1G, you integrate, you take the trace along the variables you want to glue together. And here, this is exactly the same situation, except that you have possibly many boundaries that you want to glue together. Okay. So this is in the same spirit, and it's called a partial trace. So these operators that you attach to this decorated surface are supposed to be compatible. And this is the way Segal views CFTs. So why would you want to do so? Basically, the idea, the general belief is the following. You start with a closed Riemann surface, and now you will cut it into elementary pieces. So I help you with the cutting. These elementary pieces are just disks, pans, and annuli. So for instance, here, this Riemann surface, I draw circles to cut my surface. And so around each mark point, I draw a circle, and then I connect all these circles with pans and annuli. And basically, you should get, from this cut here, you should get these elementary pieces here. So here you have pans. So these pans are just, well, you can think of them as sphere with the 3 holes. So basically, this guy here is a sphere with 3 holes. You have another one here. And in between, you glue the pans with the annuli. Okay. And basically, the moduli space I told you about a bit before is parameterized by this by this cut, in the sense that to each annuli you can attach its length. So this is just the length of the annuli, and a twist, because you can turn one end of the annuli, and it's called a twist. And if you do things in a way that is way more subtle than one I described here, you can parameterize your set of your moduli space by this sketch here. This is a very rough picture, but this is the idea. Okay. So now it turns out that you can see 2 important things when you cut this way. First, how do you treat the pans? When you have a pan, so this is a sphere with 3 holes, and you glue disks to the ends, then you get a sphere with 3 mark points. So here the disks have each of them has 1 mark point, and when you glue these 3 disks to a pan, you get a sphere with 3 mark points. And in conformal field theories, these 3-point correlation functions on the sphere are called the structure constants. They are the very important elementary pieces of your CFT, and they are model dependent. Okay, each CFT carries its own structure constants. And there is another important piece in the CFTs, which are conformal blocks. Actually, these are analytic functions of your gluing parameters. So these are the L stand for the length of the annuli, theta the twist, and this is the position of mark points. So these conformal blocks encode the way pant and annuli are glued together, and they are supposed to be universal for all CFTs with the same central charge. Okay, so you have 2 important parts: structure constants, model dependent, conformal blocks, which are function of these parameters and which are supposed to be universal for CFTs. And the conformal bootstrap tells you that all correlation functions in CFTs can be represented as an integral over some real parameter P's, a family of pieces that evolve in the real line. Here, well, and this measure rho of P here is just a product of structure constants. And here you have the modulus squared of the conformal blocks. Okay, this is supposed to be the universal structure of conformal field theories. This is an open question. And what I'm going to, well, let's say that this is a general belief, but this is an open question. Segal tried a lot to answer this question. And actually, there has been some work in math to make this conformal bootstrap, well, to give some rigorous ground to the conformal bootstrap. It's called the vertex operator algebra. It's a theory that has been well, introduced by Borchert at the end of the 90s, and got the field medal for that. But it only works for let's say compact CFT so far. And I don't want to explain what are compact CFTs, but let's say that if you like the analogy with Markov processes, it's the case of when the state space of your Markov process is finite dimensional. Well, not finite dimensional, just finite actually. So, but it's just an analogy. So for non-compact CFTs, it's an open question. And what I'm going to tell you today in a very short way is that our work is about not all, but only one non-compact CFT, which is the Liouville CFT. And for this CFT in particular, Segal's axioms are valid and give you the bootstrap formula. Well, this is my message today. And now I want to explain a little bit what is this Liouville CFT.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to remind you that there are about 10 minutes left. Yeah,
okay. So very shortly, so Liouville CFT is based on a path integral. So this path integral here is well, it's of is under the form that I told you about. So here you have the uniform measure on maps. These maps are defined on a Riemann surface and taking values into the real line. And these maps are weighted by the Liouville action. So this is an action on your manifold. Here you have the gradient squared. Here you have the Ricci curvature. And here you have the exponential of the map. And you integrate this quantity with respect to the volume form on the manifold. So you weight the uniform measure on maps by this Liouville action. So it was introduced in physics by Polyakov in the 80s. And I guess Nina will tell you more about this in the next talk. I will be very brief today here. So let's say that you can actually give sense to this path integral, and the mathematical definition involves the Gaussian free field. So basically, so this is the expectation values indexed by your Riemann surface and your metric. So you take a Gaussian free field in the metric G, and your expectation is with respect to this Gaussian free field. Here, the C variable here is integrated over the real line and with respect to Lebesgue measure. And the mathematical definition is this quantity here. Here you have the Ricci curvature. So this is a linear perturbation of the Gaussian measure. It's not difficult to make sense of this term here. Here you have something which is a little bit more subtle. It's called a Gaussian multiplicative chaos. Basically, this is the exponential of the Gaussian free field. And as you know, that this Gaussian free field is not a fairly defined function. Taking the exponential is not completely straightforward, so that you have to regularize your field and take the limit. So when you take the limit of your regularized exponential, you have some divergency that you have to tame with this extra factor here. This was done by Kahn in the 80s, and you can make sense of this exponential of Gaussian free field. Here, you just have a metric dependent constant, which is the determinant of Laplacian. You can make sense of this term, but I won't explain today how to make sense of this determinant. Anyway, you can make sense of this path integral. This is well, the take-home message on this slide. There is a way to define the path integral, and you can even define the correlation function. Correlation function for the Liouville CFT are just exponential of your field. So your integration variable is phi here. So basically, you take the exponential of your field at the location z, and well, this is like a Laplace exponent, and the alpha, the way you index your random fields is this Laplace exponent alpha here, so that the correlation function you want to compute at this product of Laplace exponents. Okay, that you integrate with respect to the your functional integral. Okay, of course, there are some regularization involved here, but I don't want to say more about that. So the point is that this correlation function makes sense actually under some restrictions. First, the weight, the Laplace exponent shouldn't be too large, so they are less than some value q. So maybe I should stress something. Your path integral, I forgot to insist on something. Your path integral has basically 3 parameters: the gamma here, the mu here, and the q here. Q is a function of gamma. Q is here. So basically, when you have gamma, you have the q here. And the mu is not very relevant because your theory has some scaling properties with respect to this mu. So the only parameter which is really important is the gamma that you got here. This is the same gamma that appears here in the exponential of the free field, and this is the only relevant parameters for your theory. So, well, back to the correlation functions. They are well defined if the weights are not too large, so they should be smaller than the q. And this the sum of all the alpha I is bigger than the Euler characteristic of your surface times q. Okay, this, which is called the Seibert bounds. And actually, for the Riemann sphere, the Euler characteristic is 2. And so each alpha is less than q. The sum must be greater than 2q. And in particular, this implies that the n that you've got here is certainly bigger than 3. Okay, so correlation function on the Riemann sphere exists provided that you have at least 3 fields. Okay. So, and just a word on this structure constants. So the 3-point correlation function of the sphere, you can, as I said, you cannot have 2 or 1-point correlation function. It starts at 3, and basically, well, let's just say that you fix the metric on the Riemann sphere to be the round one, the one you get by projecting a ball onto the complex plane by stereographic projection. So it gives you the round metric. And if you could compute the correlation function, the 3-point correlation function on the Riemann sphere with respect to this round metric, actually, this is not something obvious, but you can explicitly compute this quantity. And this is the structure constants of the CFT. Well, it's a crazy formula, which is called the DOZZ formula. I won't give you the formula right now, maybe at the end of my talk, if during the question, but let's just say that I want to insist that there is a formula mathematically proven for these 3-point correlation functions, and it is called the DOZ formula. Okay, so now how do you define the Hilbert space and well, how do you define the Hilbert space if you want to use the approach à la Segal? Well, basically, you have a functional integral. And I will be very brief. I just want to give you the idea. Okay, sorry. So you have a Riemann surface, and you have a circle. I draw a circle here, which cuts your surface into 2 pieces. And if you make a zoom around this circle in local coordinates, you have close to this circle, you have a cylinder. Okay, just if you change your coordinates, you have a cylinder, and your maps phi, which is defined on the manifold in local coordinates, is defined on the cylinder. So now, if you parameterize your variable in polar coordinates, it turns out that the map T, which is the position on the circle, on the cylinder here, if you look at your map this way, it's a Markov process. It's a Markov process when you move time, and it takes values on the set of functions defined on the circle. Okay, so it generates a semigroup. Let's call it exponential minus th, and the h is called the generator of dilation, because in this parametrization, you just delay when you move time, you just delete the radius here. Okay. Well, it's called the generator of dilation. So your Hilbert space, in 2 words, is just the invariant measure for this summing. Okay. You have another symmetry of your system when you instead of dilating your space locally, you can just rotate your space and it generates another well, unitary group. And pi, the generator of this unitary group is pi here in my talk, and well, it's the generator of rotation. So basically, you can use symmetries to find your Hilbert space with your path integral. So now, just a very crucial point is that first, the generator of dilation and rotation commute, and they can be diagonalized. So you have a complete family of generalized eigenstates, which are labeled by P, so the real line, and Young diagrams. So Young diagrams are just decreasing sequences of integers, which decreases to 0 actually. So so you can find a family of eigenstates indexed by these Young diagrams and these real numbers. And furthermore, these eigenstates give you a spectral resolution of your Hilbert space. So spectral resolution just means Plancherel formula, if you want. Okay. So this is very convenient to decompose your Hilbert space into elementary pieces. And what is even more important is that the spectral resolution, so the eigenstates, when you have no Young diagrams, when these Young diagrams are empty, they correspond to disk amplitude, as I will show you next slide, tell you next slide. I will define the next slide the amplitudes. So basically, these eigenstates, for some of them are disk amplitudes, and actually for all the other, they can be by some algebraic rules. All the other eigenstates can be deduced from this disk amplitudes by some very explicit algebraic rules. So I won't describe too much this way, but the take-home message here is that you have a complete description of the spectrum of the eigenstates of your generator of dilation and rotation.
Sorry, Amy, I don't want to interrupt. Is it possible to wrap up in roughly 2 minutes?
Yes, I'm almost done. I think I have, well, 2 slides. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so now how amplitudes, how they are defined. So if you take a Riemann decorated surface, the idea is to condition your path integral with some prescribed boundary values here at the ends of your manifolds. So this is just a formal description, but you can do it mathematically. And so when you condition on the boundary fields, you have you can show that it defines a trace class operator, mapping the out boundaries to the in boundaries. And all the family of all these kernels for all the possible decorated surfaces satisfies the Gall axioms. So you can show that conditioning your path integral with some appropriate boundary condition make you can check that Segal's axioms are satisfied for you with CFT. So now you just have to compute basic amplitudes, and now let's start with the annuli. So the annuli are just a composition of this the semi-group and the generator and the generator of rotations, and where the time of for the semi-group of dilation is given by the length of the annuli, and for the generator of rotation, the theta here corresponds to the twist of your annuli. So you have an explicit expression for the annuli. For the pants, as I said, the eigenstates correspond to disk amplitudes, so that when you glue them to pants, you get the sphere with 3 mark points. The sphere with 3 mark points is the structure constant of your CFT. So for Liouville CFT is given by the dose formula. And for the other eigenstates, so when you have Young diagrams here, you can use your algebraic rules. This is called the Ward identities, to compute exactly the point amplitude applied to these eigenstates. So you can compute all the basic amplitudes for the Liouville CFT. And the final slide is the following. So how can you get the Botsra formulae from these elements? So the procedure is, one, you cut your surface into elementary pieces. You express the fact that the global surface is the gluing of all these amplitudes of elementary pieces. You express the fact that these gluing are actually partial traces. These partial traces are integrals over your Hilbert space. You develop this, you expand this integral over the Hilbert space for each gluing with the spectral resolution. The spectral resolution will make that your eigenstates will correspond to disk amplitude, so that you will fill the holes for all the points with disk amplitudes. This will give you the structure constants. So points will contribute to structure constants. And in the end, you get the fact that the correlation function for Liouville CFT is indeed given by some, as the structure I said, with here a measure rho, which is the product of structure constants. Here the integral of, here you have the conformal blocks. And actually the dimension here is 3G. G is the genus of your surface, minus 3 plus n. N is the number of mark points. There is a typo here. I'm done. So thank you for your attention. And yeah, thanks.
Well, thank you for this very nice talk. So there was one question in the chat, which in the interest of time, I suggest we postpone to after Frederick's discussion. So I now kindly ask Frederick to, Remy, ask you to unshare, and Frederick to,
yes, sure,
to share his screen and start with the discussion of Remy's talk.
Can you see this?
We can see very well. The stage is yours.
Yeah, so my plan was to give some kind of very incomplete and a bit maybe impressionistic sketch of the kind of historical context of the work of Remy with co-authors. So I'll try to go maybe a little bit faster than I thought originally, but and then we can have a little bit of discussion. Is that okay?
Yes, perfect.
So, right. Okay. So. So the question, when doing some historical survey like this, is always like where to start, right? But if one starts at Feynman's path integral, and if you do this kind of switch to imaginary time, at least on the surface, things look pretty similar to the standard setup for statistical mechanics, and we saw this a little bit in this talk. On the statistical mechanics side, I mean, you have this Gibbs measure, and you're somehow summing over configurations according to this. But what you get in this kind of complexified, or rather now real Feynman type integral is some continuous version of that. Actually, I'm not sure when historically this idea to try to use QFT methods to describe statistical mechanics models arose, but certainly in the 60s, probably earlier, it was definitely there. And the rough picture is as follows: that you look at exactly as Remy sort of explained, you look at some statistical mechanics model, like the Ising model, for instance. You read at a few sites energy density or spin or something like this, and you take an expected value. Right? So this is a nice probabilistic quantity. And then if you tune your model in exactly the right way, you look at the model at criticality, at the critical parameter, people somehow realize that there should be a scaling limit. Right? You should be able to let the mesh size on which to define your model go to 0, and maybe you need to renormalize somehow, but then you should get something in the limit, right? And of course, if you take a scaling limit, what you get should be somehow scale invariant. So you get some kind of function like this, which depends on the sites where you read your observable, and somehow the idea is that this function, this limiting correlation function, can be thought of as coming from a statistical field theory like this, like some kind of continuum version of what you started with. Okay, so I think that was Polyakov who realized that, okay, if you have some scale invariant model in the limit, like this, some scale invariant continuous model, it's quite natural to think that the model should also be conformally invariant, in the sense that it's somehow invariant, it transforms nicely under global conformal transformation, so fractional Möbius transformation. So this allowed this he made explicit in a paper from 1970. And this is, but this is only a sort of finite dimensional group of symmetries for the model, basically in any dimension. But in 2 dimensions, there are more conformal transformations than in other dimensions. Right? You have, for instance, Riemann's mapping theorem. So there are really infinite dimensional symmetry. And this was understood by this landmark paper, Vellaba and Polyakov and Zamolodchikov from '84, who somehow managed to use this kind of much stronger conformal symmetry in 2 dimensions, and they could express this using what they call the Virasoro algebra, which is somehow the symmetry algebra of these local conformal transformations. They could combine this point of view with what was then recent results by Feigen and Fuchs and Katz on the representation theory of the Virasoro algebra. And this they somehow combined with ideas of Wilson from the 60s. This is really this start of this bootstrap approach somehow, that you can write correlation functions as some sort of series for some in a kind of nice way. And at the end of the day, this was a very powerful approach, and they could identify a parameter, basically sort of classify models according to this so-called central chart parameter, this C. And they could also identify certain sort of simpler models, these so-called minimal models, which also Remy touched upon a little bit. So essentially, all the theory is somehow coming from just a finite number of basic fields, and then you can somehow act with some operators to get all the other interesting fields. Okay, so that was of course a huge breakthrough. And at the end of the day, what you can do is find differential equations on your correlation functions and basically compute them. So in some sense, this is the game, this is the goal of CFT, is to somehow compute these correlation functions corresponding to whatever fields or operators you're interested in. And then if you're interested in the lattice model, you can somehow go back and interpret properties of the continuum limit in terms of the discrete model. Okay, so this is, I mean, of course, a huge topic in mathematical physics with many applications and so on. But at the same time, somehow that this developed, also string theory developed in physics. And I also want to point to this paper that also Remy mentioned, with Polyakov in '81, where he pointed out this as a main problem for sort of mathematical physics or science in general, is to develop an art of handling sums over random surfaces. So somehow try to deal with these path integrals where you're summing over. So his motivation for this paper was some basic questions in string theory. But one way to view what he was trying to do is to sort of go back to the lattice model. So the way I defined it was just on just Euclidean lattice, but you could imagine somehow taking also a random lattice in some nice way, and somehow couple the statistical mechanics model with this kind of random graph or random map, and then try to pass to a limit with this thing. And then the idea somehow is that you should get some kind of matter model, which is the statistical mechanics model, and then this underlying random graph somehow encodes what one could call sort of 2D quantum gravity, whatever it is. Okay, so Polyakov asks himself, how to handle somehow such a continuum limit of this kind of 2D quantum gravity. And so at the end of the day, he ends up with this kind of picture that you should expect to have some kind of random Riemannian metric where you have a weight like this, where this phi should be this Liouville field, right? So I don't know if this is the first time this kind of action appears, or if this was maybe Remy can ask later. But certainly this is explicitly given in his paper. Okay, so this is a very strong motivation also to study the sort of corresponding CFT corresponding to this this field. And what one can see, or I guess what was realized pretty quickly, is that this is more complicated than the ones that were handled by sort of DPC work in '84. So it's not the case, for instance, that you have this finite number of fields that generate all the stories and so on. And as far as I understand, trying to understand this field theory was part of the motivation for this work of DPC from the previous slide. Okay, and then there were also other works by Knižník, Polyakov, and Zamolodchikov, who somehow explain how to relate quantities somehow computed in quantum gravity, which sort of correspond to Euclidean quantities. This is this KPZ formula. Also, they pointed out the importance of vertex fields. This was, I guess, also coming from the work of Lutsenko and Papier, but this also appears there. So, as I said, the game is somehow to compute correlation functions, right, in CFT, and finding the correlation functions for this Liouville CFT was sort of difficult, and I guess that took some up until the mid-90s for this to be achieved in physics. So there are two separate works of Dorn Otto and Zamolodchikov brothers, Z squared. So they could somehow compute this 3-point function and implement to some extent this conformal bootstrap in this Liouville story. Of course, string theory, etc. This is a huge topic as well, and I'm not claiming to make any sort of complete description. Okay, so somehow at this point, this is a very nice story that there's a lot of structure in these CFT methods. They're very powerful to describe, for instance, critical phenomena, and so this is, really something that that exists somehow in nature. But one problem with all this story, of course, is that it's all non-rigorous, right? And at this point, it's not clear, what any of these things mean. Can we somehow understand these, what these field theories mean in a precise mathematical way? And I mean, okay, so that story has also been going on, I guess, since the early days of quantum field theory to try to make things rigorous. Right? It's a very natural approach. And I also don't want to say so much here, but it's always the part of the problem is that this path integral that is very nice for maybe making computations, and it's nice to because of this analog to discrete models and so on. But it's very hard to define rigorously, right? So, what can you do? Well, one sort of approach is to say that, well, okay, let's maybe forget about the path integral. Just focus on what it does for us at the end of the day. Just focus on, say, what properties should the resulting correlation functions have, for instance, and try to put down axioms for that. And then maybe we can worry later about, trying to actually construct in some way some kind of path integral measure that would represent these correlation functions. So in some sense, this is one idea behind this sort of constructive field theory. You try to write down some some axioms that should be satisfied by, that gives a meaning to the notion of a CFT or a QFT, but not necessarily using the path integral. So there are also many ideas here, and actually I want to just mention also sort of work here from the 60s and 70s that is really behind, sort of, in some sense, precursor of sort of recent developments in dynamic formal geometry. This sort of work by Lim, Japp, Zimanzik, Nelson, Barry Simon, and so on let's say the GFF, but also this sort of Markov fields, loop measures, and so on. But then also part of this story is this work of Siegel, which gives this kind of very abstract point of view of conformal field theory that's really it's expressed in the language of category theory. So it's somehow very far from this probabilistic intuition that we might have, starting with the statistical mechanics model, taking a path integral and so on. But really, again, the idea is to focus on, you know, what should be the actual outcome. You know, if you know that you have a field theory, what should the properties be and so on. Okay. And this in turn inspired, for instance, Attiah's definition of topological quantum field theories, which is related but has applications in geometry and so on. But this is also very far from this probabilistic picture. But still, I mean, if you give these axioms, fair enough, you know, but you still, you know, at the end of the day, you want to actually give constructions that you can work with, right? So this problem somehow remains. I mean, of course, in some cases, I mean, here people could give precise probabilistic descriptions, constructions. So, but again, this sort of very natural is to try this probabilistic approach to really build some honest measure such that if you compute an expectation or integrate with respect to this measure, this gives you the correlation function. Okay, so this leads us into almost the last slide, this sort of more modern probabilistic developments. And here I want to also, these are somehow related or in the same context as the results of Remy with co-authors. There's of course the SLE story. Usually this connections to CFT is not what is emphasized, but this was noticed very early on that these certain martingales that, well, these observables that you get naturally, these, if you apply Ito calculus, you get some equations, and these equations are of the same type that also arise in CFT. So this gives you a kind of nice probabilistic way to interpret those. You can understand what the fusion rules and so on by this sort of geometric random story. And okay, so there recently some new work, maybe that in Nina's talk will explain somehow connecting the SLE story with sort of more CFT type ideas. Another approach is, you know, how to understand what is the CFT and so on. You know, if you're able to prove that your discrete model, like expectation renormalized, converges to some, you know, whatever CFT predicts, maybe that is a way to somehow define the CFT. It is the limit of this discrete object, if you can prove that the limit exists and so on. And in the case of the Ising model, through work of Smirnov, Shevkat, Kongler, and Uzurov, and so on, these sort of ideas of discrete complex analysis were employed to prove for the Ising model that these discrete objects do converge to what they should, that was predicted from CFT. Okay. But then the sort of recent story here is really based to a large extent around probably the simplest possible field theory, which is the Gaussian free field, which is something that we do understand, I guess, since the 70s at least, as a rigorous mathematical object. It's some random distribution living in some negative index Sobolev space, for example. Then there's a work by Kang and Makarov where they make rigorous this sort of Coulomb gas type model for CFT and also connect to this SLE story. And then there's this, what Remy also mentioned, this Gaussian multiplicative chaos story that now we can connect back to Polyakov's idea of this random measure or this random metric one can somehow make sense of these, renormalize the measure in the good way and get some random measures. So this was somehow understood in some sense by Kahan already in the 80s, but then kind of rediscovered and resurrected well, on this side of the millennium. And there are many people who work. I'm sorry, I'm probably leaving out a lot of people. But, and also this sort of SPD approach, I just don't mention at all. But I did mention it, but only as a comment. So, but really these two stories with the Gaussian-free field and this Gaussian multiplicative chaos somehow merges in the work of Remy, in particular with Antti Kupiainen and Benson Vargas, and it has allowed them to give this really rigorous, nice probabilistic understanding of what is this Liouville CFT, right? So they have a clean probabilistic definition of this path integral, meaning one can represent these correlation functions as not exactly expected values, but there is an expectation and an integral, like Remy showed. At least there's a nice, well-defined measure that represents these correlation functions. This gives a nice, very clean interpretation of this story.
To interrupt.
I'm done in next.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. It also allows them to compute these structure constants, this DOZZ formula. This is really a spectacular work. Maybe we can ask Remy to show this expression, because it's very complicated special function. This somehow combines with this notion of conformal blocks in the bootstrap story to allow, which allows them to get expressions for all the multi-point correlation functions. And then what we heard really explain now, the verification of Siegel's axioms, which somehow gives also a very clean example then of this, that we also have a nice probabilistic understanding. So this is somehow very, I don't know, satisfying to me at least. And there are also many recent works by others that also move it. So I'm over time. So let me just move to the sort of question part, the discussion part. This is a bit like the setup of a PhD defense in Sweden, actually. Make this presentation. I think Remy is going to pass. So I don't know how to shall I?
So I think, yes, we'll have time for some questions, but I think, so even though we're short of time, first of all, thank you very much for this very nice talk. And before we go to question, I think we should take the time to turn on our videos and give the two of you, Remy and Frederick, a well-deserved round of applause for these nice talks. So thanks very much.
Yeah, so maybe I can ask. I just start with one question. Just sort of, I mean, in these stories, when you look at these sort of all the physics papers, both the Polyakov paper from '81, but also Siegel's paper and so on, there's always the string theory is always in the background somehow, or maybe even at the forefront. This is what feeds intuition to Siegel's definition, I think, and so on. So I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on, the relation with sort of rigorous aspects of CFT, or sort of string theory, and your work on the Liouville CFT, and what sort of questions you see ahead in that direction. It's a broad question.
Thank you for the discussion. It was very nice. Yeah, concerning the relation with strings, is just that when you have locally a two-dimensional manifold, you can take one space variable for time and another one for space, and those strings are the way this. If you look at, well, it's a section of your amplitude if you want, And when you move well, one space variable, actually you see a string evolving in space. So I think that the intuition is there. It's just that time string is just a moving distorted circle, if you want, so that if you make it evolve along time, you get those amplitudes that you see on your pictures. So, well, actually, concerning the paper by Polyakov for strings, actually, he was interested in defining non-critical strings, and he knew at the time that he knew at the time that bosonic strings were critical bosonic strings were not defined, but he wanted to define, to give sense to this non-critical strings with this Liouville CFT. And I think, well, the question is, what is now to study about this? Well, of course, the first question is was to define these non-critical strings, but this is now something we know how to do with these GMC measures and this path integral. Actually, you can glue, as you say, we can couple now this Liouville CFT with matter fields to even have a general mathematical definition of these non-critical strings. But I think the main questions now are related to this question are the convergence of this discretized model, random planar maps for the strings. But well, actually, yeah, yes, maybe the convergence of discretized models, and also well, what is perhaps even more interesting now is this supersymmetry version of this non-critical strings. But I have no clue how to define them right now. Yeah.
But this is right. This was maybe related to the other this AGT story and so on. You have this some mysterious duality between 2D real and some 4D supersymmetric.
Yeah. This is another story, but perhaps
it reaches beyond the sort of clear Gaussian.
Yeah. The deepest question are probably yes, with the connection between Liouville and supersymmetric Young Mills, and yeah, and the one part of this story is the bootstrap formula for Liouville, and the other part of the story is the connection between the Nekrasov partition function and this bootstrap formulae. But I think that there are a lot of things to be done in these directions, and also maybe the ADS CFT correspondence with Chan-Simon.
I'm very sorry that I have to interrupt you. I have been asked by the organizers to in the interest of time to unfortunately interrupt the discussion, but I want to remind everyone and invite everyone that further questions, of course, are very welcome in the GatherTown format. But what I wanted to do is, because I promised, so there was one question in the chat, which I am afraid will be the last question, but I still want to raise it. And it was, I think, a question to Rémi about what the intuition behind the mark points is on these paths that you have been showing. So yeah, on the sphere, what the intuition would be about these mark points that you get when gluing.
I think there is nothing special, but let me just write. Let me just say that if you have well, just go back to 1G. If you have a Markov process, it's indexed by time. So if you want to compute the law, you just want to evaluate your process at some time t and give the law at some given time t. And this t, the time is just the analog of the marked point z on your surface. You just want to evaluate your stochastic process indexed by a surface index instead of time. And so this marked point are just well, if you want, they just index the finite dimensional distribution of your random function, your random field. So the intuition is, I mean, well, it's just that, I guess. You know,
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe Teresa, who asked the question, wants to discuss further in GatherTown, as can everybody else. So thank you very much, Remy, for the very nice talk, and Frederick for the discussion. Sorry again for cutting you short, but in the interest of time, we now have to move on.